Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today. I'm here with the Kawasaki Eliminator 450, not officially called that, and I've got it on test for mcnews.com.au, and so there will be a written review up at the website. Check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, I'm going to give some quick thoughts on the bike just here today. After doing a couple of 100Ks on it, we've had a lot of wet weather. This is the first semi-dry day we've had in the 2 weeks I've had the bike, and I've been really impressed with the Eliminator. In fact, I like it more than the Z500, which surprised me quite a bit because I'm not a huge cruiser guy. I do enjoy cruisers, but generally speaking, naked bikes are a bit more of the style of bike that I do really like. This machine obviously came out the first of the new 450s from Kawasaki, and that does mean that I think in some ways, the way the engine has been set up for this bike is much more suited to the cruiser kind of theme. That parallel twin is maybe not as chunky as a traditional kind of cruiser like I would want. However, it is a really good power plant in this bike. It's got a nice smooth down low, quite a flowing kind of power delivery. And then as you get up through the rev range, you get that much better torque and quite a punchy engine as well. And so this bike is going to be lots and lots of fun everywhere. Unlike a traditional cruiser, it's not going to have that really kind of heavy going torque down low, that real punch that you'd expect from a V-twin, but this thing revs out way better. It carries its speed very well. It's got quite a slick gearbox, a nice light clutch as well, which is something we saw on the original Ninja 400. I'm not sure the bike is quite as light at the clutch as the original Ninja 400, but it doesn't really need to be. That bike was probably overkill, and this is still going to be one of the lightest clutches in the class. Combine that with the slick gearbox, there was a couple of times I found it a little bit notchy, but generally speaking, it was really good. Very easy gear shifts, and just the usability and the accessibility of that power makes for a really fun machine. Running through the twisties here this morning, I was having so much fun. I was actually probably a couple of gears up than I would usually be, even on like a Ninja 400 or the Z500. I was just enjoying that nice slow down torque, which again, it's not really punchy torque, but you've got plenty of torque there. There's a really nice flow of the bike. I'm not sure the fueling was quite as good as the Z500, but I just preferred the engine characteristic on this particular bike over that Z500, which was a bit sportier. Obviously, looking at the Eliminator, it is a more modern and quite a sporty cruiser. It's not a traditional cruiser. It isn't covered in chrome. It is not a traditional cruiser in being quite heavy and a little bit unwieldy. Nothing could be further from the case. This is quite a light machine. It's a very nimble handler, surprisingly so. I'd say in some ways it may not have the ground clearance of the Z500, but a very nimble handler. And I've just spent the last day on the new Royal Enfield shotgun, and obviously that's a 650, so that's competing with the Vulcan. But jumping back on one of these smaller cruisers really drove home just how nimble and light and easy to ride this thing is. Very low seat height, which is going to appeal to shorter riders, and I will jump on. I'll do that now because I always forget if I don't. Nice low seat height, super easy reach to the ground. Obviously I'm a taller-ish rider, 180 centimeters, 32-inch inseam. So a bike like this is never gonna be hard for me to get a foot down on. But the bike is very narrow between the legs, which really helps there. In contrast, once you get your legs up, there's actually a bit of a stretch across that tank because the tank is wider where your knees are gonna be. And then you've got a nice, quite relaxed reach to those bars, as you can see here. Super relaxed seating position, very comfortable. The bars have got quite a bit of bend back to them towards me, which means I'm not too stretched out for them. And it also means that a little bit of input on those bars goes a very long way, which is no doubt part of where that nimbleness comes from, because this bike really does turn on an absolute dime. So quite impressive. The seat, I'll jump off. The seat has got a nice bit of sculpting to it, which is kind of like almost that bucket style. Very comfortable, really works, and again, nice and low. So if you're a shorter rider and you're thinking about jumping on one of these bikes and you're a little bit worried about the height side of things, obviously competitors to this are going to be the Rebel 500, which is a little bit more classically inspired, I would say. or the 502C, which is again kind of more of a modern cruiser. They all have the lower seat height, but yeah, this one in particular, I was really impressed by just how low it is and how comfortable it is. And with the footbed placement as well, again, it's not forward controls, which aren't a particular favorite of mine. This works very, very well indeed. There's obviously some preference involved in what you like in the ergos of a bike, whether you prefer the forward controls or you prefer a little bit more height in your seat or things like that. But I think this is a very, very good package and set up really well for new riders. The Eliminator is going to be a much easier bike to handle because it is so light. And yeah, just that manageability is going to be a big boon for beginner riders. And certainly if you wanted a cruiser that you can throw around and really kind of get a bit of lean angle on and have quite a bit of fun, I think this is going to do the job really, really well. As far as brakes, we're getting a single disc brake on the front, we're getting obviously a single disc brake on the rear, and yeah, there's good braking performance, nothing that I'd really rave about, but also nothing that I personally felt was limiting the bike in any way, and so that is good. The suspension is a little bit more on the basic side when we're looking at what's coming out in 2024, maybe less so in the 450 class, where the 650 class is starting to see some kind of more impressive, on paper at least, suspension setups. But I can't really complain about this bike. Front end feel was good. There was pretty good support as well on the brakes, but again, not a super powerful brake system. On the rear, we've got the shocks as well. And I actually found that this was a little bit plusher than the Z500, which is what you'd expect. But through the old road here, where the Z500 was quite punishing because the rear was really impacting my spine, on the Eliminator, it's comfortable, and that is what I want. I want to be able to go over those bumps and not be in pain, and the Eliminator did that exceptionally well. Now I'm 75 kilos, there is a little bit of preload adjustment available in those shocks to modify it for where you are, but for me at 75 kilos, I'm pretty happy with the stock suspension setup and how this bike handles, how it rides across the rougher road conditions, because the roads aren't that great. We've had so much rain, there's lots of potholes, lots of divots, lots of really not great road surfaces. And I was very, very happy indeed to be on this particular bike because I didn't feel like I needed to avoid every pothole in the road to enjoy my ride. So that's very important. Here on the back of the bike, we do just have the single pipe. Kawasaki have kind of kept it minimalistic, I would say. They've blacked out the engine, they've blacked out the exhaust, they've blacked out everything except the paintwork, which personally is my favorite. I really like that kind of style and that styling choice on these motorcycles. And then in the orange, which is the SE color, you're getting a real splash of color, which stands out to me. And I love that. Some people will prefer the full blacked out kind of style cruiser, fair enough. But to me, this is the looker of the Eliminator options. You do have like the little miniature headlight cowl here. You've also got a USB-C charging plug on the front here with a little rubber boot on it so that it doesn't get water in it, which is lucky because there's been a lot of water lately. Apart from that, quite a simple LCD dash. And so again, Kawasaki have kept things simple. They've been a little bit conservative with this bike, but I actually think it works much, much better with the Eliminator than it does with the Z500, because the Z500, we're talking about a sportier naked bike. I think the expectations for specifications and performance are a little bit higher. And while certainly in the engine department, there's no complaints at all, in that category, a TFT display is probably starting to become the norm. And in the cruiser category, I think the LCD display works just as you'd want it to and is pretty much what we're expecting at this kind of point in time. So overall, the Kawasaki Eliminator to me is the perfect beginner cruiser. I do think that the 650 class bikes, while for someone who wants to jump a bit more in the deep end or is looking for a little bit more of a challenge or that bigger bike feel, are certainly going to tick all the boxes. For a lot of riders, they're considering something which is really easy to manage, light, which this particular in the cruiser class certainly is. That's a huge standout with the Eliminator. And then also we've got the nimble handling, we've got a great engine in it. It's a fairly forgiving engine, but it does have a lot of performance. So you're not losing out on the performance side of things. Maybe you're losing out on the torque side of things somewhat. You do have to rev this engine to get the most out of it. But to me, that's a happy compromise to make. And certainly if you're the type of person who likes the more futuristic cruiser, I think there's a good chance that you're going to prefer also that kind of more revvy parallel twin. Almost all the options these days are parallel twins, so you're gonna have to make that compromise, I would say, on most of the beginner cruisers. However, I think a lot of people would have plenty of fun on one of these on their full license as well, because there's a really good amount of performance. As I said, great comfort. It's a stylish machine. The overall ergos are nice and relaxed and very, very inviting. At least for me, as I said, I'm 75 kilos, I'm 180 centimeters, 32-inch inseam. Everything works perfectly for me. So I think if you're a similar size or proportions, this bike will probably do it all for you, which is hopefully what you're after. As far as criticisms, there's not many that I can really lay against the bike. I did have a heap of fun on this machine. As far as other kind of criticisms, I did find there was a couple of times where I just found the transitions, which may just have been me, on and off the throttle, a little bit rough. And I think I was probably just being a bit ham-fisted with my inputs. And yeah, I got to take some responsibility for that. But that nice low down flow of the engine does make it a really nice kind of bike to sit in the lower part of the rev range on and use that lower part of the rev range, where on some bikes I feel like you really want to be in that meaty part of the torque. You can do that on this bike, no problems whatsoever. However, you don't have to make the most out of it. And I think for a cruiser, being able to ride it in a more relaxed manner is probably going to be a win for a lot of riders. One criticism that I do have is there's still those vibes through the bars, which is something that I noticed on the Z500. Obviously this is the same engine, but in kind of a different tune. And that was something which I noticed not to the same extent as on the Z500, but through kind of a specific part of the rev range. I think, maybe 4,000 to 6,000 RPM, it was noticeable on this bike. And depending on how much you're sitting in that rev range, you might find that starts to cause a bit of numbness. I didn't find the numbness on this bike, but I did on the Z500, and I do think that's worth mentioning because some people are very, very sensitive to vibrations and vibes, particularly through the bars, and that was, again, one of the very few criticisms I have of this bike. Overall, really cool machine, and yeah, great job from Kawasaki. It's a little bit of a different offering. As I said, kind of you got competition like the Rebel 500, which is much more of a traditional cruiser. This is, I think, a bit more futuristic, which probably, if I'm being honest, is more in line with the kind of styling I like. And then you do have other competition like, say, the 502C from Benelli, which again is kind of a more futuristic cruiser, but I haven't had a chance to ride one of those, so it's hard to make too much of a comparison there. Anyway, got any questions about the Eliminator? Let me know down in the comments. As always, stay safe out there. Thanks for watching.